Arts reporter at the Winston-Salem Journal, and I'm really excited to be here today with Riley Baugus. Everybody who's here obviously knows who he is. Riley's probably the greatest clawhammer banjo player in these parts and maybe in many, many other parts. He's played everywhere. He's been all over the world. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. We claim you as a Piedmont musician, but where have you been recently, and how does travel sit with you, Riley?
You know, I don't really mind travel because you get it in your mind that you've got to go through all that security. You just do it, you know. And if you start letting it get to you, then it's not fun anymore. And I wouldn't do this if it wasn't fun. But I was recently in Bangor, Maine. 2 weeks ago, I was in Bangor, Maine at the American Folk Festival, which used to be the National Folk Festival. And I was in Maine twice this year. I was at the Acadia Track School up in Bar Harbor and taught for a week, and been to Vermont, Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan, Washington State, just traveling all over. I haven't been out of the country this year. I typically take a few European trips. But
it sounds like you know where to go when it gets hot and humid down here, though.
Well, you know, my agent somehow books us tours in the Northeast in February, January and February. It's like he can't look at the Weather Channel or something. I don't know.
What's it like to perform close to home?
Well, it's strange because I never actually get to play in North Carolina that often. You know, it's like if you're going to Nome, Alaska, it's hard to sell people snow because they've got plenty of it. And it's kind of like that around here. There's lots of music and lots of old time music, and people are kind of used to it, and they figure, well, why should I go out to a show when I can just go down to the country store or go over to so and so and hear it, you know, or walk over to the neighbor's house, that kind of thing.
Who did you go hear as a youngster? Who did you listen to?
You know, I used to listen to Doc Watson a lot. And fortunately, later in my life, I got to be friends with Doc and Rosalie. I worked on a record with Robert Plant and Alison Krauss a few years ago called Raising Sand, and we recorded one of Rosalie's songs called Your Long Journey. And Rosalie heard it and she loved it, and they would call me. Oh, honey, why don't you come up here? And so I would go up and visit with Doc and Rosalie, and often play music with Doc, and started doing some shows with him and that kind of thing. It was a lot of fun. So I was in Surry County, Tommy Jarrell and Fred Cochran and Kyle Creed and Dix Freeman, and Benton Flippin and Robert Sykes, all these great old time musicians from Surry County that are known internationally but hardly known here. You know, they're national treasures, and Tommy Jarrell actually won the National Heritage Fellowship Award one year, which is a great honor. It's one of the highest honors you can get as a traditional musician.
That's great. So those were your influences, and who are you listening to now? Who do you listen to these days?
Who do I listen to these days? I still listen to a lot of different old-time music. There are a lot of old recordings and field recordings that were made from the 1930s on up until, you know, the 80s or 90s. Because a lot of the great old-time musicians were the old source musicians, as they were referred to. I'm sorry, I'm tying this strap back on while I'm talking. But a lot of those old-time musicians were still around, and people would go out and just make field recordings of them. They'd sit in their living room and say, well, Mr. So-and-so, would you please play these tunes for us? And they would. And so there's a set of recordings called the Field Recorders Collective. And people from Tommy Jarrell to Ola Bell Reed to Fred Cochran to Doc Boggs, lots and lots of different people, and early Doc Watson stuff. Just him, you know, they're all part of this Field Recorders Collective, and they're just CDs that you can get of casual recordings made in somebody's living room.
That's great. I want to flip back to an earlier question that I meant to ask you, and I'm not going to ask you too many personal questions, but when we were talking about travel, I noticed that your wife is not from around here.
Oh, she's got a Walkertown accent.
Oh, yeah, right. So I wonder if you would mind telling us how you met her. Where she's from.
She's from England. She grew up in London. She was born in New Zealand, and her father got a job in London, so they moved from New Zealand from the Esk Valley, New Zealand, to London. So she grew up around London, and she has a bit of an English accent. You know, you might say it's a bit British. I don't know, but I have a really good time with her. I love my wife. She's a lot of fun, and she's here. She's on a walkabout now, because that's what them people from down in the Southern Hemisphere do. They go on walkabout.
Well, did she just walk about into Walkertown one day?
Well, no. Here's exactly what happened. She was learning to play the banjo, and she knew my name as a banjo player, and they had seen Cold Mountain, and so she saw that I was going to be doing a concert in London at a place called St. Boniface Folk Club, and so she came out, and I saw her, and we just said hello, and that was all, you know. And the very next summer, I was doing a banjo festival in Ireland called the Johnny Keenan Banjo Festival, and she came out to the festival, and I saw her, recognized her, and immediately got her phone number and have talked to her every day since. And then she came over in 2009. We started seeing each other. It was a long distance relationship that worked, because I was spending a lot of time in Europe, so I was doing a lot of shows in Denmark and Finland and Sweden and traveling around England as well. So I would always stop off at her house in between. You know.
So you're engaged for 7 years?
Sort of like that, yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Well, only 5, from 2004 to 2009.
Okay, only 5.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you got something in common, the banjo, right?
We do. She was learning to play, and she doesn't play very much anymore, but she's a great banjo player. She won't hear that, but she's a great banjo player.
Well, speaking of banjos,
yep.
Whenever I read or whenever I hear you talk about banjo, you say that you're a clawhammer banjo player.
I'm a clawhammer banjo player.
I wanted to see if you could explain to us the difference between clawhammer and maybe bluegrass or another style that shows people the contrast.
I can do that. I'll show you 3 specific styles of banjo. Starting with the clawhammer. Let me put this down. I'm just going to talk like this for now because you're going to want to hear this. Banjo. It's an instrument that was developed here in America, but it is the child of an African instrument called the akonting, which is still played in Senegal and Mali in the Senegambian region in Africa on the west coast. So the instrument, the akonting, is just a gourd with a stick for a neck, and it usually has 3 strings, but 3 or 4 strings, but one of them is always a little short string. People believe that when you say a 5-string banjo, they think we added this one, but that's not true. And the 4th string, or that big bass one, is the one that they added because it makes it easier to play Western style music or European style music on the instrument. You know, European fiddle tunes. They still play the akonting in a style very much like American clawhammer banjo. It's different, but very similar, because they hold their hand in the shape of a claw. The reason it's called clawhammer is because you have your hand in the shape of a claw, a big old bear claw, and then you hammer down on the strings. Some people call it open hand, some people call it knockdown style, frailing, framming, flailing. but it's all just this. It's basically a, it all comes from a bum diddy rhythm. Bum diddy. And then you end up, after you do this for a while, and you figure out that your hand can do that, you start trying to move your fingers to make melodies. And then after a while, you get used to having your fingers go down instead of wanting to come up. So you have this thing, and you'll end up going. But that was sort of one of the accepted styles that comes from the Blue Ridge Mountains and all over southern Appalachia. Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina. Oh yeah, I forgot North Carolina. That was just one of the styles that they played. Another of the styles that came along later was what we know as Earl Scruggs style, or bluegrass style banjo. What Earl Scruggs did, until Earl Scruggs met Bill Monroe in about 1939, 1940, Earl Scruggs was just an old-time banjo player. He just happened to play a finger style. What he did was he figured out boogie-woogie music was very popular in the 1940s. So he figured out how to play boogie-woogie licks on the banjo. But he started with this rhythm with his fingers, and he has all these set roll patterns where you're playing the same. So one of the things he would play would be like. I hope it resembles bluegrass banjo playing. But then you had people like Charlie Poole and Doc Baugus. Charlie Poole was a North Carolina banjo player who popularized banjo in the 1930s by playing pretty much novelty Tin Pan Alley kind of tunes in a hillbilly way. So he was part of the cotton mill thing over in Eden. Eden, North Carolina, which used to be Leaksville, Spray, and Draper. It's three communities that came together to become Eden. So Charlie Poole played in a finger style. I'll give you four, actually. Sort of the Charlie Poole style. Alright, so finger style was a very popular style at the same time as claw hammer. But then in other places in the mountains, because old-time musicians, traditional banjo players, play in many, many different tunings. In one set, I might play as many as 18 different tunings, depending on how much time you have to play, of course. But typically, I use about 15 to 18 different tunings to play the tunes that I play. There are a lot more tunings than that. There are actually hundreds. Lots of combinations of notes that you can put together just by changing them. Baugus was a guy from southwestern Virginia who was a coal miner and a banjo player. And he had a little recording career in the 1920s, but he played very lonesome sounding things. And he played in a finger style that was sort of like this. There's 4 different styles of banjo playing. And within just clawhammer, there are several styles of clawhammer. So,
thank you, Riley. That was great. What a treat. What a treat. There was a little movie that was made in 2003 called Cold Mountain. And it was written by...
I've seen it.
It's good. It's got a great soundtrack.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. It was written by a North Carolinian, and it took place in North Carolina. The star was an Aussie, an Australian. Yep. The director was an Englishman, and most of the film was made in Romania.
Yep.
So tell us what that experience was like for you.
It was very cool. I got to go out to Nashville to a studio called the Sound Emporium, and Cowboy Jack Clements on the studio, and he did a lot of stuff with Johnny Cash, and he was a recording star himself, but he owned the studio. T-Bone Burnett loves to use that studio, and that's where they recorded the soundtrack to Oh Brother Where Art Thou. They recorded lots and lots of records there, like the Willie Nelson record called Country Music. I got to be part of that, played on that whole session, and we did it all in that same studio. But going out to Nashville was very cool. I mean, as a kid from Walkertown, North Carolina, I never expected that I'd ever get to do anything like that. But my family always used to joke and say, now you ought to grow you a ponytail and go out trying to Nashville. What they didn't know is that actually happened. You know, I took their advice. I did that. I grew me a ponytail and went to Nashville. So I ended up out there working on this film with Anthony Minghella, who was a great film director. He did things like Truly, Madly, Deeply, and The English Patient, and The Incredible Mr. Ripley. He directed all those films, and it was fun. I got to help be one of the people who was trying to teach the actors how to talk like they were from the mountains of North Carolina. I did my job. It was up to them to figure it out. In fact, the actor that played Pangle, it was a funny thing one day. I was trying to get him.
Was that Jude Law?
No, Pangle was Ethan Suplee, who ended up on My Name Is Earl playing Randy, I think. Anyway, it was Earl's brother. Now, Ethan was from New York City, and Ethan had to be a mentally challenged, gravitationally challenged person who lived in a cave in the mountains of North Carolina that played the banjo. I kind of wondered why they got an actor to play that part, because I was available. I could have done that. But anyway, I was trying to teach him one day how to say ain't, because we don't say aunts, we don't say aunt. Where I'm from, we say ain't. my Aunt Lucy, you know, my Aunt Judy. Well, I would say, okay, now say can't, and he'd say, okay, can't. And I'd say, all right, now you got that sound, that's the diphthong you want. Now I want you to say the word ain't. I said, my mother's sister is my aunt. And he looked at me and said, she ain't what?